Welcome to another story from this spot. This story is titled The Garlands on His Brow, and it's from the same book, Collected Short Stories of Ruskin Bond. So let's start. The Garlands on His Brow. There's a ditty at the beginning. It goes this way. Fame has but a fleeting hold on the reins in our fast-paced society. So many of yesterday's heroes crumble. Okay, that was a sentence. And it starts this way. Shortly after my return from England, I was walking down the main road of my old hometown of Dara, gazing at the shops and passers-by to see what changes, if any, had taken place during my absence. I had been away 3 years. Still a boy when I went abroad, I was 21 when I returned, with some mediocre qualifications to flaunt in the faces of my envious friends. I did not tell them of the loneliness of those years in exile. It would not have impressed them. I was nearing the clock tower when I met a beggar coming from the opposite direction. In one respect, Dara had not changed. The beggars were as numerous as ever, though I must admit they looked healthier. The beggar had a straggling beard, a hunch, a cavernous chest, and unsteady legs on which a number of purple sores were festering. His shoulders looked as though they had once been powerful, and his hands, thrusting a begging bowl at me, were still strong. He did not seem sufficiently decrepit to deserve my charity, and I was turning away when I thought I discerned a gleam of recognition in his eyes. There was something slightly familiar about the man. Perhaps he was a beggar who remembered me from earlier years. He was even attempting a smile, showing me a few broken yellow fangs. And to get away from him, I produced a coin, dropped it in his bowl, and hurried away. Oh, remember louder. I'd gone about 100 yards when, with a rush of memory, I knew the identity of the beggar. He was the hero of my childhood, Hassan, the most magnificent wrestler in the entire district. I turned and retraced my steps, half hoping I wouldn't be able to catch up with him, the man, and he had indeed got lost in the bazaar crowd. Well, I would doubtless be confronted by him again in a day or two. Leaving the road, I went into the municipal gardens and, stretching myself out on the fresh green February grass, allowed my memory to journey back to the days when I was a boy of 10, full of health and optimism, when my wonder at the great game of living had yet to give way to disillusionment at its shabbiness. On those precious days when I played truant from school, and I would have learnt more had I played truant more often, I would sometimes make my way to the akhara at the corner of the gardens to watch the wrestling pit. My chin cupped in my hands, I would lean against a railing and gaze in awe at the rippling muscles, applauding with the other watchers whenever one of the wrestlers made a particularly clever move or pinned an opponent down on his back. Amongst the wrestlers, the most impressive and engaging young man was Hassan, the son of a kite maker. He had a magnificent build, with great wide shoulders and powerful legs, and what he lacked in skill he made up for in sheer animal strength and vigor. The idol of all small boys, he was followed about by large numbers of us, and I was a particular favorite of his. He would offer to lift me on his shoulders and carry me across the akda, to introduce me to his friends and fellow wrestlers. The Akhada is the wrestling arena. That's the place where people practice wrestling, Akhada. From being Dera's companion, Hassan, from being Dera's champion, Hassan soon became the outstanding representative of his art in the entire district. His technique improved, he began using his brain in addition to his brawn, and it was said by everyone that he had the makings of a national champion. It was during a large fair towards the end of the reigns that destiny took a hand in the shaping of his life. The Rani of so-and-so was visiting the fair, and she stopped to watch the wrestling bouts. When she saw Hassan stripped and in the ring, she began to take more than a casual interest in him. It has been said that she was a woman of a passionate and amoral nature, who could not be satisfied by her weak and ailing husband. She was struck by Hassan's perfect manhood, and through an official offered him the post of her personal bodyguard. The Rani was rich, and in spite of having passed her 40th summer, was a warm and attractive woman. Hassan did not find it difficult to make love according to the bidding, and on the whole he was happy in her service. True, he did not wrestle as often as in the past, but when he did enter a competition, his reputation and his physique combined to overawe his opponents, and they did not put up much resistance. One or two well-known wrestlers were invited to the district. The Rani paid them liberally, and they permitted Hassan to throw them out of the ring. Life in the Rani's house was comfortable and easy, and Hassan, a simple man, felt himself secure. And it is to his credit, and it is to the credit of the Rani and also of Hassan that she did not tire of him as quickly as she had of others. But Ranis, like washerwomen, are mortal. And when a long-standing and neglected disease at last took its toll, robbing her at once of all her beauty, she no longer struggled against it, but allowed it to poison and consume her once magnificent body. It would be wrong to say that Hassan was heartbroken when she died. He was not a deeply emotional or sensitive person. Though he could attract the sympathy of others, he had difficulty in producing any of his own. His was a kindly but not compassionate nature. He had served the Rani well, and what he was most aware of now was that he was without a job and without any money. The Raja had his own personal amusements and did not want a wrestler who was beginning to sag a little about the waist. Times had changed. Hassan's father was dead, and there was no longer a living to be made by making kites. So Hassan returned to doing what he made. So Hassan returned to doing what he always had done, wrestling. But there was no money to be made at the Akhada. It was only in the professional arena that a decent living could be made. And so, when a traveling circus of professionals, a Negro, a Russian, a Cockney Chinese, and a giant Sikh, came to town and offered 100 rupees and a contract to the challenger who could stay 5 minutes in the ring with any one of them, Hassan took up the challenge. He was pitted against a Russian, a bear of a man who wore a black mask across his eyes. And in 2 minutes, Hassan's Dehra supporters saw their hero slung about the ring, licked in the head and groin, and finally flung unceremoniously through the ropes. After this humiliation, Hassan did not venture into competitive bouts again. I saw him sometimes at the Akhada, where he made a few rupees giving lessons to children. He had a paunch, and folds were beginning to accumulate beneath his chin. I was no longer a small boy, but he always had a smile and a hearty backslap reserved for me. I remember seeing him a few days before I went abroad. He was moving heavily about the Accra. He had lost the lightning swiftness that had once made him invincible. Yes, I told myself, the garlands wither on your brow. They boast no more of your mighty deeds. That had been over 3 years ago, and for Hassan to have been reduced to begging was indeed a sad reflection of both the passing of time and the changing times. 50 years ago, a popular local wrestler would never have been allowed to fall into a state of poverty and neglect. He would have been fed by his old friends, and stories would have been told of his legendary prowess. He would not have been forgotten. But those were more leisurely times, when the individual had his place in society, when a man was praised for his past achievement, and his failures were tolerated and forgiven. But life had since become fast and cruel and unreflective, and people were too busy counting their gains to bother about the idols of their youth. It was a few days after my last encounter with Hassan that I found a small crowd gathered at the side of the road, not far from the clock tower. They were staring impassively at something in the drain, at the same time keeping a discreet distance. Joining the group, I saw that the object of their disinterested curiosity was a corpse, its head hidden under a culvert, legs protruding into the open drain. It looked as though the man had into the crawled into the drain to die, and had done so with his head in the culvert, so the world would not witness his last unavailing struggle. When the municipal workers came in the van and lifted the body out of the gutter, a cloud of flies and blue bottles rose from the corpse with an angry buzz of protest. The face was muddy, but I recognized the beggar who was Hassan. In a way, it was a consolation to know that he had been forgotten, that no one present could recognize the remains of the man who had once looked like a young god. I did not come forward to identify the body. Perhaps I saved Hassan from one final humiliation. That's such a sad tale there. That's over.